Imagine being a Roman soldier in the year 40 AD. You've been called to the coast by your emperor, who has promised great rewards and plunder to all those who serve with distinction. After all, according to Suetonius, he was descended from Neptune, the god of the sea. When Tiberius Augustus's adopted son succeeded him as emperor, he left Caligula out of his will, granting the throne to his own son, Drusus. This infuriated Caligula, and it wasn't long before he began plotting his revenge. She forced him into a marriage with a girl named Lolia Paulina, and some sources claim that the bride was only 12 years old. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Caligula hated her, and when his mother died, he was inconsolable, even though she had always played favorites with him. He unleashed poisonous snakes into the audience at the gladiator games and watched with glee as the crowds panicked and fell victim to poisonous bites. He chained chariots to chariots in taxicab-style accidents and laughed as noble senators were mangled to death. Once he released poisonous snakes into the audience at the gladiator games and watched with amusement as the crowds panicked and fell victim to poisonous bites. According to Suetonius, the emperor arrived at the port of Ostia with a fleet of warships and a legion of soldiers, and gave orders for them to prepare for battle. In the morning, the troops marched to the shore, and upon reaching the water's edge, they fell to their knees before Caligula. There, in the wet sand, the emperor distributed helmets, breastplates, and shields to his men, as well as tridents, spears, and hooks. Then he raised his own trident aloft and charged into the waves. No one really knows what goes on inside an insane person's mind, but his bizarre war on the sea remained a story that was told and retold, keeping alive the memory of the most theatrical emperor Rome had ever seen. But as far as the people of Rome were concerned, the sea had indeed been subdued, or at least it had been that day. But the truth was, the sea couldn't care less about the little band of Roman weirdos pranking it on the beach. The Emperor Caligula was notorious for his insanity and megalomania, and it seems entirely plausible that he might have waged a real battle against the sea. And we've got lots more on the way. So subscribe to our channel if you'd like to join us back here every week for new adventures in ancient history. But why? And was he actually victorious? Well, that depends on how you look at it. On the one hand, he did manage to make it back to Rome without drowning, and given that he was a superb swimmer and sailor, that hardly counts as a victory. On the other hand, he collected seashells and seaweed as spoils of war, and was crowned the victor Neptune. So I'll let you be the judge. The sea simply went on being the sea, crashing against the waves and claiming ships and men alike. And sure enough, it didn't take long for it to get its revenge on the foolish mortals who thought they could conquer it. The poor girl was blamed for the emperor's depression and was eventually exiled. According to Cassius Dio, the waves crashed against their legs and swept their feet out from under them. In ancient Rome, the act of hubristic aggression against natural forces was often punished with disaster. We can see this in the story of Aristarchus, who infamously challenged the god of the sky Zeus to a boxing match and was killed when lightning split him in half. The story of Caligula serves the same purpose. His assault on the sea is a perfect example of hubristic behavior, and his sudden demise serves as fitting retribution. The emperor raised his trident again and gave the order to collect the spoils of war. His men returned to Rome, laden with seashells and seaweed and armored in broken tridents. They paraded before the emperor's open carriage and shouted, "Caligula, the victor Neptune." They hung nets filled with seashells from the horses' bridles and crowned the beasts with seaweed. Some say Caligula even dressed a donkey in purple robes and put a laurel wreath on its head, then drove it along the streets while it pulled his chariot. The Romans fought back with all their strength, but they could not prevail against such a foe. This was a military triumph, and Caligula intended for his subjects to take him seriously. He rode in a golden chariot drawn by elephants, wearing armor that had been crafted specifically for the occasion. It was decorated with scenes depicting the battle against the sea and the galley slaves, who pulled his chariot wore shackles on their wrists and chains around their necks. A banner stretched above him proclaiming, "The sea has been subdued." Caligula shouted for more men, and soon the whole beach was a scene of utter pandemonium. Legionaries hacked and slashed at the waves and pulled seashells from the sand, all the while roaring with laughter, and he liked to wield both at the same time. He dressed as a commoner and prostituted himself in taverns and brothels, where he would pay the girls with gold coins that bore his image. And the coin had a hole punched through the center of it, so that Caligula could see his own face, while he pleased himself. The boy had always been different. From the time that he was born, people said he looked more like a girl than a boy, both in appearance and in character. At last, he had the empire to himself, and he quickly set about making changes. Now that he was in charge, Caligula did many good things, including opening up grain stores to feed the hungry, building public works projects, and even helping to rebuild Alexandria after a devastating fire. But as history remembers him, his good deeds are overshadowed by his wild cruelty and theatrical insanity. He ruled with a combination of childish glee and terrifying violence, and he seemed to take great pleasure in scaring his own people. And so it was that he decided to make war on the sea. His mother, Julia Drusilla, indulged him, allowing him to play with dolls and wear women's clothing. His behavior did not improve as he grew up. When he was just 9 years old, he summoned the Praetorian Guard and made them watch as he threw gold coins from the Palatine Hill, screaming with delight as the common folk fought over the riches. As you march alongside your comrades towards the sea, you hear shouts and laughter carried on the salty breeze, and the glint of sunlight off armor catches your eye. On the beach, hundreds of Roman legionaries are stabbing at the waves, pulling seashells from the sand and cheering each other on. When Tiberius went hunting, Caligula would hide behind trees and ambush the hares, shouting, "Catch me if you can." And once the emperor sent him to Egypt as a sort of prodigal son and heir apparent, Caligula insulted everyone from the governor to the priests of the goddess Isis. It soon became clear that Caligula had to be watched at all times. So Tiberius appointed his own wife, Livia, as the young man's guardian, and right in the middle of them is Emperor Caligula himself, brandishing a trident and roaring with laughter. What in the name of Jupiter's going on here? Caligula had come to conquer the sea itself, or so he told his advisors. Some say Caligula was insane from birth, but while he may have been crazy, he was also very shrewd, perhaps even more so than his uncle, the great Augustus. Tiberius kept Caligula in check for much of his reign, but the young man was already proving to be a handful. But Livia had her own designs on the empire, and she used Caligula as a pawn in her own schemes. When Tiberius finally kicked the bucket in the year 37, Caligula was about 24 years old. He hosted feasts, inviting 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat. And then there was the matter of the prostitute. Caligula loved 2 things more than anything else in life: sex and power. But these were merely symptoms of a greater problem, a profound instability that lay at the heart of the emperor's mind. The Roman army had defeated many formidable enemies, but none so strange and terrifying as this one. His soldiers followed him into the shallows, and at first, it seemed as though they were facing a real enemy. Then suddenly, just as abruptly as it began, the battle was over. This was no laughing matter. How exactly he expected to subdue the sea was anyone's guess. Only a few months after his naval triumph, Caligula was dead, murdered on the orders of his own grandmother, Julia Misa. In our telling, this tale is a warning about the dangers of pride and hubris. But some scholars believe there may be more to this story than mere legend. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: no one is safe from the whims of an insane emperor, not even the sea. Thank you so much for watching. We've made hundreds of videos about ancient Rome, from the gladiators, to the emperors, to the everyday life of ordinary Romans.